the Culture, a podcast dedicated to preventing and reducing interpersonal violence around the world through empowerment self-defense. Studies have shown that 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men, and 1 in 5 children experience interpersonal violence in their lifetime, and isolation caused by the pandemic has increased incidence of domestic violence by more than 30%. This is why we're here. My name is Annie Orenstein, and today on the show we have Renee Wentz. Renee Wentz is a marriage and family therapist by profession, born in the USA, but living in Belize, Central America for over 20 years as a dual citizen. She obtained a black belt in Taekwondo in the US in 2000, and as part of her Taekwondo school, she was required to learn and teach self-defense. Months after moving to Belize, she began teaching self-defense, and in 2006, she completed the self-defense tract with the NWMAF, which is the National Women's Martial Arts Federation. In 2017, she was part of the team that created the framework for Empowerment Self-Defense Global. With ESDG, Empowerment Self-Defense Global, she's taught in Costa Rica and Brazil. Ms. Renee remains the only ESD instructor in Belize and has taught well over 3,500 people there with her program, She Thing, Self-Defense and Personal Safety. Welcome, Renee. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Annie.
It was so great meeting you. I'm so happy to have met you and to get to know you here through our podcast and to share your voice with the world. So thank you for being here. Maybe we can start by you sharing with us a little bit about what it was like growing up in the US, and your story of going from childhood into a bit of adulthood. It's important aspects of what you've been through.
Well, I grew up in a very rural area in Illinois. Anybody maybe out there might be listening would know Mendota, Illinois. It's a very small town. It's farms and factories. After the factories moved out, it really became kind of a bedroom community. But when I was growing up, we were farms and factories. My parents were factory workers. So I grew up, I would say, working class. In my experience of how the culture was when I was growing up, I'm 54 years old, so that can give you a framework or a timeline for the time that this was all happening. I did experience different levels of violence. I was sexually abused by a neighbor at a very early age. In my family home, there was a lot of, corporal punishment, belts, and those kinds of things. There was a little bit of verbal kind of stuff. And when I was a child, I actually became a bully because I think I didn't have control over what was happening to me in my home life or in my neighborhood, but I could have control because I was a very large child. I was the tallest child in my class until I was in high school, and that means over the boys. So I was a bully mostly to the boys. But on the same level, I also was a hero. I had a hero fantasy. I had a very bad case of pigeon toe when I was a child, and I was put into the kind of braces they use for polio. And once I was out of those braces, I had to wear what we call saddle shoes. They were popular in the 1950s. This is the 1970s. They were not popular. I couldn't wear regular shoes at all. I couldn't wear tennis shoes or sandals or go barefoot. I constantly had to have these shoes on. And, every year I'm wearing the same shoes. So I was bullied quite a bit. I was very clumsy. I was big, oafish. And there were 2 children at my school who, one of them had, I believe, cerebral palsy. The other one had muscular dystrophy. And I still, when I would see them, one was older than me, one was younger than me. And when I would see them getting bullied, I was the first person to step in and tell the other kids, if you don't stop, I'm going to hurt you, that kind of thing. So that was my hero fantasy. But as a bully, I ended up being violent, physically violent to people I loved. So I would hit my sister, I would hit my friends, I would hit eventually, when I had my first boyfriend, I would hit him. Not even usually out of anger, sometimes out of anger, sometimes playfulness, but I was very strong and it wasn't really playful. When I got to be in high school, I decided this has to stop. I cannot be hitting people. I didn't like it. I felt ashamed. I felt bad when I did it. So I was able to sort of work very hard and able to kind of control that, although I still had that underlying anger and all of that. I was an athlete in high school. So I played volleyball, basketball, and I threw shot put and discus. And when I got to be older and came into my adulthood, um, and I was in my marriage, my ex-husband now, his sister was involved in martial arts. She was involved in Taekwondo. And she said, Renee, you should come to our classes. I think that you would love it. I think you would be great at it. And she had told me about how her classes were. They were very militaristic, in my opinion. It was a male that was leading the class. He had it very much like a sport. And they used to get punished by running and doing push-ups. And I was like, I was an athlete for enough years. I took that punishment. I'm not going to pay for somebody to punish me.
Right.
So it wasn't until a few years later that we moved to another area, the same area, Madison, Wisconsin, where his sister and her partner moved. And I got into Taekwondo kind of by accident because a friend asked me. We had a Groupon, what we would call them now, for one person gets in, one gets free. I ended up walking into the class, and there was my sister-in-law.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was so eerie, but it was a women's class, and our teacher, Lisa Amaker, Lisa Amaker, the sensei there, she also taught self-defense. So I fell in love with Taekwondo, and as we progressed through the belts, we had to demonstrate self-defense. And when we got a little bit higher, we had to assist her in her classes. And so I really enjoyed self-defense and I really enjoyed Taekwondo. And I knew I was going to be moving to Belize. So I worked very, very hard to get my black belt before I left because I wasn't sure what I was going to encounter there. I was living in a small village. And I didn't know, I said, I have to have my own thing. So when I moved to Belize, then there was someone who approached me. My ex-husband was bragging that I had a black belt to people. And I was approached and asked to teach at a gym, to teach karate at a gym. And basically I said, I don't know karate, so I probably can't do that. I asked why people at this gentleman's gym would want to learn Taekwondo. And he said, for self-defense. And I said, I can teach self-defense.
Wow. Wow. Before we go into Belize, I wanted to ask you about what was the healing process for you like in terms of when you got into Taekwondo and you mentioned, being also the bully, being also the hero. As what I understand is that you saw children or young, students suffering like you did through the bullying, and you wanted to protect them from that. And that's really, really special, really beautiful. What healed you? And you have a success story back in the grocery store I want you to share.
Oh, yeah, great. I will. Let's start. We can start with the grocery store story so we keep it in chronological order. But I think that because I knew what it was like to be bullied and vulnerable, I had this natural inclination to want to protect and want to protect people, even animals with vulnerabilities. I was always, I just was a person that always looked for somebody who needed help. And hence why I think I went into marriage and family therapy in the end there as well. So when I was in high school, when I was in primary school, in fact, it was the third grade by the way American schools work, I had a teacher who just did not like me at all. She would tell me I ran like a cow, that I was clumsy, that I was too fat, that No wonder the other kids didn't like me because I was unlikable.
It's horrible.
I asked her one time, because she used to keep me after school a lot and for punishment. And I asked her one time why she hated me so much, and I was crying. And she said, "I don't hate you. I just hate everything you do."
That's
I
horrible.
was like about 8 or 9 years old, and you can't divide those things.
Mhm.
But she retired after that year. I was in her last class before she retired. When I was in high school now, I was a senior in high school. I was just getting ready to graduate, and I met her in a grocery store, and I hadn't seen her in years. Now I'm about 5'10" by this time. This little lady, maybe not even 5 foot, she was a tiny little piece of woman. And she was standing in front of me, checking out her groceries, and I was wearing my Letterman's jacket. And
Mhm.
people who know about sports will know what that is. You have all your letters from varsity and all the sports you played and everything. And so I just simply said to her, "Hi, Mrs. Richardson." I didn't say it in a threatening way. I just said it in a friendly way. And she looked at me confused, and I said, "Oh, you don't recognize me." So I told her, that time I used my first name. I use my middle name now, but I said, "I'm Shelley Wentz. Do you remember that little girl you said run like a cow and was clumsy and nobody would like her?" I said, "This jacket here that I'm wearing, these are all mine. I have earned all these, and I'm an athlete." And I said, "On top of that, I am on the dean's list at my school for having
Wow.
academic achievement. And
Wow.
I've already been accepted to 4 universities, so I get to decide which one I want to go to. And you couldn't hurt me. You couldn't keep me down." She looked terrified.
I can
Uh,
imagine.
yeah, and that gave me a lot of pleasure, unfortunately. But I didn't do anything aggressive to her. I just remember the girl that was doing the checkout after she got her groceries and scurried off. Um,
Mhm.
the girl doing the checkout was like, "Wow," and really like that was. I think that was kind of the beginning of, taking control and saying, you tried to, you really tried to destroy me, but you couldn't.
Mm.
And that gave me some confidence, eventually, to start making some changes. Um, and it was still long coming.
It's interesting because many of us, and I don't know if this is included in the interpersonal violence theme necessarily, but these one-off statements um, that adults might say to a child that the child ends up carrying with them throughout their whole lives, and they'll never forget it. And things that come out in such a cruel and unloving way can change us forever, but could also fuel us to become who we are as well. And that that trans that transition that you went through, right, when you saw her, you were also using, I think, it made me think of the one of the five principles. It made me think of you're telling this individual, telling her off, but you're also
Yeah,
telling
yeah.
her what you've accomplished, and you're establishing, you know, your sense of self right there. And you also mentioned before how going to Taekwondo really changed the aspect of how you approach physical. Um, you said you had hit before, and then at some point.
Well, I just want to say something about teachers quick before I talk about
Mhm.
Taekwondo. I always say you remember your worst teacher and you remember your best teacher. And I was
Right.
lucky that when I did get to high school, I had a teacher named Jerry Atherton. And I'm going to say her name because I'm going to send her a link to this podcast. That
Hi,
she
Jerry.
was a person who really changed my life because she believed
That's
in me.
beautiful.
She thought I was smart. She would give me personal books to read that she thought I would like. And she really showed an interest in me that, you know, I'll never forget her. And I think, I can't remember hardly any of the names of any of my other teachers, but I
Mhm.
remember those two names and I'll never forget them. So, Jerry, thank you. You're all over the world, Jerry. Um,
Amazing.
when it comes to Taekwondo, one of the things, and even more with self defense, was that I learned my power, physical power. I mean, I was always strong, but I
Mhm.
learned how to control it and manage it. When we would spar in our class, we didn't have competition in my school. And so everybody would spar at the same time, and we didn't keep track of points. You were just, but we never hit hard. We never hit full force. So the whole idea was to be fast, but light. So you were just tagging someone. You're just tapping them, tagging them. And that took a lot of effort for me because I always hit hard. I did everything hard. If I was going bowling, it had no finesse. It was just, I could throw that bowling ball down there so hard that nothing was going to stand up. So when I learned how to control it and manage it, it had a side effect that I didn't expect. That I was able to manage my emotions, because that's the part that was still there. And so now I say, you can say any vile, horrible thing to me, get very close to me in my face, and I will just say, I might be assertive if I feel threatened and say, back off, leave me alone. Or I might, if I don't feel threatened, I might say, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. But if you touch me, then it's over, right? Then you're going to find out what's going to happen. And just having the knowledge of what I could do means I don't have to do anything except for speak. I have not been in a fight since I'm 54 now. Since I was about 24 years old, I have not punched anybody, and that guy deserved it.
I can imagine. Well, that's amazing. It's an amazing success story, because really channeled energies and healed in that way, and strengthened yourself, and came to ESD for yourself. And now you brought it to Belize, and you're teaching thousands of women, men, children all over Belize. You get to travel now a bit more even, and ESD Global is expanding. It's amazing. It's amazing. So I know that your motto is, you shared, I'm a peaceful person, but I will fight if I have to. How do you show that in your on your hands?
Well, a long time ago, when I first started my organization, I decided you have to have a logo. So I had somebody take photo of my hands in Taekwondo. We call this B position. And I might be totally wrong, because again, it was a long time ago, but I remember my sensei saying that this hand means I'm a peaceful person, right? And this hand means I will fight if I have to. So that's my motto for my self-defense. My sheathing self-defense is, I'm a peaceful person, but I will fight if I have to. So the pictures were just of my hands in this position, and then I colorized them, back like 20 odd years ago with terrible software, but it stuck. Yeah.
So one is a fist and one is a palm, open palm.
An open palm.
Open palm rests for our listeners for the Change the Culture podcast. Those that aren't watching us, you can watch our video. God willing, we'll be uploading this podcast to YouTube as well. It's basically a hand over fist. It's a joint. Two things. It's not what we want. We don't want to fight. We want to be peaceful, and yet stand up for ourselves and know and set boundaries. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Amazing. So tell us about sheathing, self-defense, and personal safety, how it was established. Once you got to Belize, you jumped right in teaching, and she stands for
self-defense. And I used a hyphen there so I could make it just just the S. And I use the equal sign, equals her empowerment.
Amazing.
I wanted to come up with something catchy, and it took me a long time, and then that's why I had to use hyphens and equal signs just to make it that I could still keep it she.
Sheathing, self-defense, and personal safety, established in 2001. So you are, congratulations, it's 20 years. It's a huge amount of time. It's a big chunk of time to be providing women, girls, and men with, and also other underprivileged communities. Maybe you could share about who you reach and your goals.
Mostly I say I work with any vulnerable group, but I also work with youth groups and people that we don't really know their vulnerability offhand, but
Right.
Last summer, I worked with some in the city where I live, in Belize City. We have a lot of areas where there's gang violence. And so I worked with some girls we would maybe call at risk because of their neighborhoods. I think we had 15 or so girls in that summer program. And I asked them at one point how many of them had lost a family member to gun violence. Every single one of those girls had, whether it was their father, their brother, their uncle, their cousin or something. And so, I work with groups like that, that we can recognize that they're obviously vulnerable. But I work with foreigners that have just moved into the country. I worked with the LGBT community. We established our relationship back in 2008. And I've done a lot of trainings with different organizations in the country that are LGBT plus organizations. I've worked with the elderly through an organization called Help Age that works with older people. I've worked with people with disabilities. And really, like I said, anybody who calls me and says they want me to come, we figure out how it fits. I also work with the Muslim community quite a bit.
Wow.
Yeah, I even taught a class, one of the first classes I even taught in the mosque, which was pretty interesting for me. I have worked with neighborhood watch programs. The women's department was my first kind of person that got me moving. And so with the women's department, I've been to every town in the country. I've been to the Keys, which are our main islands right off the touristy area. I've been to villages. One of my favorite classes that I did was in a village, and we couldn't get the person who had the key for the community center wasn't there, so we had to improvise. And I ended up teaching in a little park by a river, and we had like 7 or 8 women there, a child or 2 children, 2 dogs, and 7 chickens. They were at the self-defense training. I'm like, how many people have taught dogs and chickens self-defense? I don't think a lot, right? So being flexible is always important. But I've also done some corporate training, and I trained the UN a few years back, all of the UN entities in our country. So UNDP, UNICEF, and I never can remember the letters for the organization that works with refugees. So those 3 groups, I trained them as well. So it's been very interesting. I get to meet a lot of people.
That's wonderful. And if we can go to exactly why we're here, is change the culture, right?
Yes.
And you came from the US, which has a culture, different space, we talked about spatial, in the US proximity, right?
Yeah.
And you go to Belize, it's very different. And you want to teach them, but how do you teach them without coming across like the American know-it-all? It takes a lot of sensitivity to show how you respect where they're coming from, and what has it taught you in that process?
I think the thing that I'm always open to learning. That is how I deal with cross-cultural anything, even with cross-cultural counseling. If I don't know something, I ask.
Absolutely.
I don't assume. I can say what my observations are. For instance, I used to work as a teacher. I was an English teacher when I first worked here, because there weren't many, when I first moved to Belize, because there weren't many jobs in counseling at that time. And so I taught English for about 5.5 years. And I noticed that the personal space that my students and even my friends would give me was a lot closer than I was used to as an American. I always said, all the space, if I stick my hand straight out, all of that space to the end of my fingertips, that's my personal space. And that if a person I don't know comes into that space, I'm uncomfortable. But that's not really true in Belize. And so when I presented in class, we do exercises on boundary setting. I present that in class, and I tell them, there is no you don't have to stop somebody at the fingertips, because may not be your boundary. The exercise is to help you figure out what your personal boundary is. And most of them are much closer than me. And I'll ask them, is there anybody that has a giant personal boundary? And sometimes there are, because I say they're cultural, but they're also personal, even within culture. The other, one of the other big ones is the eye contact. We're Americans are very big on eye contact, and particular counselors are really big on eye contact. And a lot of times ESD instructors are big on eye contact, because that shows your seriousness, that shows you're paying attention, you're not afraid. And in counseling, it shows your empathy. And I have had to adjust that. In counseling, it's still something I work on. But a lot of when I was first training, I used to tell the women, like, you're not making eye contact. You're not making eye contact. We would do an activity where they would just tell somebody to take their hand off, and they needed to use their voice, their facial expression, and eye contact. When I finally was with a group, and I realized that they start at the toes, many of them, many people, because again, there are always exceptions, there are always people, but generalizing, many Belizeans start at the toes. They'll turn around, they'll look at you, they'll say, take your hand off. They start the eye contact at the toes, and they move it all the way up to the body. They get to the eyes, they lock in on the eyes, and I call that the boom, right? That's boom. Like all the way up and boom, right? And so by me observing that and saying, hey, oh, now I get it. Now I get it. You can do eye contact right away if that's comfortable, but you can do the boom, and that's just as good. So I have learned so much from the people that I've worked with about how families operate, how people understand gender-based violence, how it is for many people in Belize, it is a rite of passage. It is, and from childhood sexual violence all the way up to violence within intimate partner violence. And I remember one time I did a training with a group of women, and we were talking about different types of violence. It's just a talk we had after doing the self-defense. And we were talking about, physical violence, emotional violence, financial violence, and those things. And one of the women said to me, Miss, if that is what abuse is, I don't know any person, my neighbor, my friends, or my family that hasn't been abused. And that really affected me. And so I'm a real advocate. I am a part of the gender-based violence committee in Belize, and I'm a very big advocate in the country of us making some cultural changes, change the culture.
Absolutely.
How do you do that? Well, we don't have really great conviction rates for people who have been accused or charged with crimes, with violent crimes against anybody for real. But when we're talking gender-based violence, usually against women and children, oftentimes people are only fined even when they're found guilty, and the fine is like $175 US. So you can beat somebody up for $175 US and go about your business. So we need to tighten up on that for sure.
That's a big job. That's a big job. It's really showing a commitment also to this country that you weren't born in, but you're giving your heart to. And it's a big job. And you also, a few years ago, you wrote an article in the San Pedro Sun, right, about catcalling the lioness. Maybe you can share a little bit about that challenge. Has it evolved since you wrote the article? Do you see any progress?
When I wrote that article, I think it was in 2011. So I can't do math very well, but it's about 11 years. Yeah. And so sadly, it hasn't changed personally. And when I talk to other women, it hasn't changed. I thought by the time I was this age and I was old and, not old, but older, I first got catcalled. I was like 32, 34 years old, and I was fit and, sexy. I thought, and I thought, oh, men are recognizing me, because in the United States, I can't remember ever once getting catcalled ever in my entire life. So it was a brand new thing when I moved here. And it doesn't matter the culture. It sometimes doesn't even matter if men are with their little children. They will still say disgusting things to you. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's disgusting. And so, unfortunately, it's something that I have to help train people on in my classes because they don't know how to respond. They feel uncomfortable. And I have yet to meet a woman who's told me I like it.
Right.
Because one of the things that people will say a lot of times when men are defending themselves, they'll say, oh, you shouldn't worry when they catcall you. You should worry when they stop. Or it's just a fallout of being beautiful. No.
Right.
No, it isn't, because they do it to grandmas. They do it to little children that are dressed in their school uniforms. They know very well those are primary school girls. So I treat them, I teach them to use their instinct and what kind of response they want to give. I've tried a campaign and it took off and people got excited about it. But the next year when I tried to gather other people from around the country, this one couldn't do it, that one couldn't do it. And so it's something I think it's time for me to revisit it. Interestingly, when I went to look up that article to send it to you, I saw a link on the same newspaper and it said catcalling is a crime or something like that. Or, oh no, it said catcalling is harassment, sexual harassment. When I read it, it was written by a man and it echoed what I said 11, 12 years ago. It echoed that, which was so interesting that a man wrote it, number one, but also that he talks to his female friends. He sees what his male friends do. And it was almost like you could have said word for word, some of the things came out of my article. And so unfortunately, that's saying we haven't made a lot of progress there.
And what do you tell? It's a long haul. It's and you're one person, and I bless you that every drop of progress that you get to see it and hear the feedback from others. You had a t-shirt that you printed. It said on it, what did it say on it?
My name is not Hey Baby.
Right. My name is not Hey Baby.
We did a campaign and people brought different t-shirts and signs, and we did a little march and got some media attention then.
Wow. So we have a few more minutes, and I'd love for you to just share again about your proposal that you have for Belize, and what your dreams are the next 20 years.
I want to start by just saying I can't shout out people by name because I'll leave somebody out, and I don't want to leave anybody out. But I have to say that there have been women in Belize for 30 or more years working tirelessly on making changes. There was no Domestic Violence Act until I think it was 2000 or so. And these women worked tirelessly to get that into legislation. Sexual crimes acts were changed a number of years ago, and there are more changes being proposed to make them non-gender specific, and also to make the types of crimes more open or broader, and to make the penalties much harsher. And there's countless women, and I have had the absolute joy and privilege of working alongside those women. And in the beginning, before people knew me and I just was a white face in the room, I would whisper to my friends and I would say, and then I would sit back and I would let her tell it. If she agreed with what I had to say, I let her say it, and then I would support in the background. So I didn't ever want to be this, there's in Belize we say that a white person thing, right? I didn't want it to be. I wanted it to be for everybody, and so I tried to be very conscious of that. And I do have to say, I've worked with some very, very wonderful, hardworking, amazing women. They know who they are,
and I'm sure they're very grateful that you're on their team.
I hope so.
Fighting the fight with them. It's good to have a team, and it's good not to be in this alone. And we are now partners, and My Power is here spreading the word. We launched My Powercast just a month ago with the Change the Culture podcast. And maybe you just can share with us before we end off, what are the courses that you offer and the workshops that you offer, and how can people find more information about you?
I do have a Facebook page. That's probably the easiest way to connect with me. It is capital S, capital H, capital E, thing, just with a capital T, self-defense and personal safety. And you might have to put Belize on that if you're not in Belize, just to catch it, because there are a lot of she-thing pages out there. That's the easiest way to contact me. You can find me as a person on Facebook, just an S, no full stop, just an S, Renee, Renee, Wentz, Wentz. Belize people know how to get in touch with me, or they know they can get to me. And basically, I come where you are and I do what you need. So I always work with people to make to meet the needs that they have and the time and space that they have. Right now, I'm working on a proposal with our special envoy for the development of women, children, and families. She is the wife of the prime minister in our country. Her name is Rosana Braceño, and we're right in it right now. I want to do a pilot where I would do a 10 to 12 week program in one primary school, upper primary for all genders, boys and girls, a high school for just girls, and a grassroots women's group. And I want to do that this year. And hopefully, if we can show success and I can show the data, then we'll be expanding that and maybe start some teaching teachers, which is being done through ESD Global. They're doing it in the Philippines. They're doing it in Albania. The other exciting thing I have to say before I leave is early tomorrow morning, I'm departing for Rwanda, where I will be for 2 weeks. I was a lead instructor for an all-gender training, and I'm just
amazing,
bursting with excitement.
You're going with
to
UD.
Get there.
Wow, that's really great.
I can't wait.
That's really great. Well, we're so happy to have you on this side of the world, and we look forward to having you back again on Change the Culture. And we want to hear progress, and we bless you with every success. And thank you for doing what you're doing, Renee Wentz. And thank you to our listeners and obviously our guests. We would love to hear more from our listeners of the Change the Culture podcast. You can email me at annie.orenstein@mypower.co.il, which is mypwr.co.il, annie.orenstein@mypower.co.il. Pop over to the Change the Culture Facebook group. And Renee, you're welcome to also share your success stories, share what you're doing on the Change the Culture Facebook group. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions and success stories with us. And our listeners are welcome to watch our podcast on YouTube or listen where you get your podcasts, where you're listening to now. We're on Spotify and other platforms. And we want you to be part of the conversation and be part of the solution. Stay tuned for the next Change the Culture podcast, where we will hear from more professionals in the field of ESD around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annie.